questions that we weren't able to cover during the course of the next hour or so. That's it. It's all yours, Liz.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Tim, and welcome again, and thank you all for joining us. This project that we'll be highlighting today in this webinar series are supported by funding from the U.S. Department Office of Victims of Crime, and we're very grateful for OVC support for this initiative. I'm Liz Keith, and I'm the Program Director with Pro Bono Net, and this is the third webinar in a series that we are doing focusing on innovative strategies to develop community partnerships designed to address elder abuse and financial exploitation. And today we will specifically be focusing on new online legal forms to mitigate and protect against common forms of abuse. And this project has been undertaken by Pro Bono Net in partnership with the Center for Elder Law and Justice. And I'm delighted to be joined today by my colleague, Claudia Johnson, Pro Bono Net's Law Help Interactive Program Manager, who is going to tell us more about the forms we developed, why we developed them, and how Law Help Interactive can be used in services to help expand legal support to older Americans who are facing these issues. For those of you that are not familiar with Pro Bono Net, we are a national nonprofit organization and we are celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. We work to bring the power of the law to all by building cutting-edge tools for advocates, volunteers, and the public, and by strengthening how the civil justice sector collaborates to tackle justice problems. Law Help Interactive is one of our key programs, and it helps people create free and accurate legal forms simply and easily, which is an essential step towards addressing a legal problem. For our roadmap today, we wanted to provide a brief recap of this overall project and how today's topic fits into it for those of you that may be joining this webinar series for the first time. But we will be spending the bulk of the hour on talking about the new Law Help Interactive forms that have been developed and that are available for all states to use and adapt. As part of that discussion, we will talk with you about where you'll be able to find the forms and share resources and tips to effectively use the forms in services for older adults. So we have been working on this effort since early 2018, and we've dubbed it Aging Safely. And as I mentioned, we have been able to undertake this project thanks to support from an award from the Office for Victims of Crime, and are delighted to be a part of their field-generated innovations in addressing elder abuse and financial exploitation cohort. The overall goal of the project that we've been working on is to develop, enhance, and evaluate two types of online tools that support partnership models that can help detect and address abuse and financial exploitation. The first is the legal risk detector, which was the subject of the past two webinars in our series. And the second prong of this initiative is focusing on the new online legal forms powered by Law Help Interactive that we'll talk about today. And our overall goal for this series and this webinar is to share our progress on this project, how you can find the forms, and to hear your feedback and questions to help us refine a toolkit and support strategies that we'll be continuing to implement over the next, in the coming months, to help programs like yours effectively adopt these tools in your services for older adults. Before we jump into the Law Help Interactive details, we wanted to just, again, provide some high-level context to this project overall. And this slide helps to illustrate in a sort of a simplified way the theory of change that we're working with here. So like many of you, we know that certain legal issues, particularly abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation, disproportionately impact older adults, but often go unnoticed or unreported. And that can be particularly the case for homebound or disabled or otherwise isolated seniors who face even greater challenges in accessing legal support to address these issues. But in many communities, the number of nonprofit legal aid attorneys and advocates available to help is far smaller than the constellation of community-based organizations, professionals in aging, and others who are interfacing with older adults in community and home-based settings every day. And at Pro Bono Net, we strongly believe in the power of technology and digital tools to be able to scale legal services. But we also know that nothing can replace human-to-human interactions, particularly for many older adults. So in this project, we are particularly interested in ways technology can help expand in-person support and services for these legal problems and equip both legal and community-based organizations serving seniors with new resources to collaborate together to more holistically spot and address abuse and financial exploitation. So the risk detector has been a key part of this initiative and again was covered in the previous webinar in this series. But if you missed that, it is a web-based legal health checkup tool that was developed by Pro Bono Net in partnership with JASA and the Center for Elder Law and Justice, and is designed for professionals in aging to screen older adults for common legal issues, including neglect, abuse, and financial exploitation, and then refer them to a partnering legal services program. It's designed to be embedded in community care networks to help legal aid organizations and community partners collaborate in new ways. And in the previous two webinars in this series, we had an opportunity to spotlight how the risk detector is being used in New York State, including by the Center for Elder Law and Justice in Western New York and JASA in urban New York City, as well as a pilot project that we have been working with Legal Services of Northern California to develop and roll out in far rural Northern California to help identify pressing legal issues and facilitate referrals for seniors in rural areas. So if you're interested in learning more, let us know and we can provide you with the materials from that training and forthcoming replication support materials that we'll be releasing this fall. So with that context, I will turn it over to Claudia to share what Law Help Interactive is and more information about the forms we've developed under this project and how we hope they can be used and benefit the work of your programs.
Okay, thank you, Liz. So good afternoon or good morning, everybody, depending on what part of the world you're joining us from. Thanks for being here. Wanted to share on the forms aspect of this project that we've been working together with Elder Justice and Pro Bono Net and others to create the forms. So what is Law Help Interactive? Basically, as you know, in the legal area, in the area of resolving legal problems, words are for the birds. Really, in our legal system, we use forms and documents to ask or document issues. So today, when a person is facing a legal problem, they encounter many barriers, but one of the most high value materials you can provide a person is an easy to use form to document an issue or to resolve it. And it doesn't matter if they're in front of a court or with a private party like an employer or a landlord, a childcare provider, etc. If people don't have access to these high value tools, there's very often unable to protect their rights and sometimes even unable to seek redress because there's no documentation. And so in LHI, along with all of our partners, we envision a world where the legal forms are really a cornerstone of the access to justice movement and can be used easily, can be found easily, and are designed for people who are not experts, who are not lawyers, that they can create a complete and cogent and elegant and powerful vector legal document to help themselves address the problem. So this vision of equal access through Law Help Interactive is, it's to help people help people and those that help them, being family or friends or advocates. They don't necessarily have to be lawyers, is to help them present the information that they need accurately and completely and to make it easy for them to find the forms, to create them, and to be able to have agency and a voice. So that's kind of our vision of how forms will bring equal access. So more concretely, what do we do? You know, we are both a legal technology platform. We do have servers and very sophisticated backend with a lot of privacy and technical expertise. So we are a technology platform, but also we are a training center. We work with many 1,800 or more legal nonprofits and courts, pro bono programs, anyone that's in the legal nonprofit world, and we teach them how to run programs, how to create forms, how to sustain those projects. So we consider we are a training center, and we do a lot of training activities to build the capacity of everybody working in the legal nonprofit field. So that's a big focus of what we do. And then we also, once our programs become really good at creating forms, once you have this cornerstone, you have this building block, which is a solid form, you can take that form and you can do partnerships with other groups. So we are always seeing what the field is doing, because you would be surprised what people can do once they have the relationships and the partnerships that often come through a form. Remote hearings for domestic violence victims in New York State, with the courts, a lot of expungement clinics. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but we're looking for those best practices and then sharing those so people can see if they can replicate those in their state once they have the proper forms. And the last thing is an innovation hub, and that's my favorite part, is to see how people then innovate. And a lot of the project here, when we pick the forms, and I'm going to get more into that, we were trying to pick forms that can be building blocks for you, for your program. We wanted to create the forms so that then you can take these forms and run with them. So that's kind of what we're going to get into. So how, and you know, I don't know how many of you have worked with the online forms, but just very quickly, I'm not going to get super detailed here. Basically what LHI does is we teach you how to create these interviews using either, you know, an A2J author 6, which is the avatar here with the model, the two people talking to each other, or a hot dogs interview. And then what they do is once they submit their answers through LHI, there's some magic that happens at the back end, and a full and complete form comes out. The person can use the system anonymously. We don't require sign up to use the forms. And then once they create their documents, they can print them. In some instances, we can modify the system to e-file with a court with permission from the end user, or they can be integrated as part of a case management system. Right now, we're doing Salesforce and Legal Server, but we can integrate with other databases so that advocates can have the forms and the documents there. And there's some other options in terms of working with LHI backend capacity that we're not going to get into, but I want you to be aware that this can be done with LHI forms. These forms that we're presenting here are the traditional print and mail, or print and handout, or print and keep, because one of them we'll talk about is it's a safety plan that is for the person to have, not to send to anyone. So how is it being used? Law Help Interactive right now has pretty solid use in 47 states. In 2018, we did over 50, more than 500,000 documents were created for free. We don't charge people to come and create documents in LHI. The forms have many, we work with basically kind of 4 channels. We work with pro bono projects. We work with legal aid staff projects. We work with self-represented people that are doing their own thing on their own at home. And we work with courts that are running self-help centers, or legal aids that are running self-help centers. And so those are kind of our main audiences, and that's what we build this system for and enhances for, constantly thinking on how can we make this platform better for those very concrete communities we serve. And we support, like I said, hot dogs is the main document assembly engine and interview, and then A2J software, DAT which is, if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about, and it's the one with the avatar. So where are the LHI forms used? LHI, since it's used in 47 states, it's a broad network of programs and nonprofits that are using them. We even have a project that I'm very excited about in Puerto Rico, that's all around housing forms because of the hurricane. But they're used at home, they're used on tablets, they're used in legal aid offices by legal aid lawyers, they're used in clinics, they're used at libraries, they're used in drop-in workshops. And so these pictures give you an idea of many of the group settings. But I also want you to be aware that they can be used one-on-one or even individually by a person, because they are guided interviews. So what we want to do is guide the person to a process before they create the form, because the more they understand what the form will do for them, the more empowered and connected and more likely to follow up they will be once the form is created, to follow the next steps. I must say also, and in this project, we took great care to not just create the form, that's the one that has the power, the vector, the direction and the request, but we also worked in creating instructions. So most of the programs that LHI prints out, the legal aid groups work on putting plain language instructions so that the person knows what process will come next and what to do once they have the form created. So I was trying to look at, what the use of LHI has been in elderly communities, and looking up to September, to our last quarter, September 30th, just this past month. We continue to do online forms. There are already groups that are doing very specific estate and probate documents in LHI, and there were about 8,000 of those created. Then there are about 6,000 abuse conservatorships and powers of attorney. A lot of these are attorney type forms. They're not out there on the internet, but some of them are. And the other thing that I get excited about is that we always assume that elderly are not using, seniors are not using technology, and every year we see an increase on the population, the demographics on seniors that are using online forms outside of this project. So we've kind of doubled it. Last year looking at 17, actually in 2017, we were at about 5.7. And I think that the Pew statistics are somewhere around there. So in LHI, we were like at around 10%. So I think that we can let go. I don't know if you guys remember the assumption that poor people would never use the internet back when when we started doing some of the work that we do here at Pro Bono Net with websites. Well, I don't hear that anymore, because that's not true. The world changes, our seniors are changing. And I think that this percentage of people that are looking at the internet to solve their problems in this area will continue to grow. The other thing is that something that I'm really excited about, 36% of our users report being in rural areas, which is great because we're trying to bridge that justice gap where there's no legal resources. So I'm very proud of this statistic, because nationally there's only like 19% of the population still considers itself rural. So LHI is making a huge impact. So if you're in a state where you have vast areas of rural communities with no services, this is a good situation to use these forms. And then in terms of the most recent evaluation that we had by a third-party evaluator, they reported to us that 95% of the people that used LHI, and this was out of a sample of over 400 users, said that they would use the forms again. And 96% said that they had their needs met, which is great, it's very high. And then 81% were able to create the document. And since I referred to guided interviews, sometimes interviews are not proper for the person, and most interviews have a little bit of a triage to make sure the form fits the facts. And so not all interviews lead to an assembly. So an 81% of people being able to create the document is a great great outcome, because it means that the forms are being found by the people that need them, and then they can sit down and complete. So now, focusing on this project, what we wanted to do was identify 3 forms in areas of law that would be helpful for people who are suffering neglect, abuse, or financial exploitation, and that would work in most states. And the idea was we're going to have agingsafely.us, which is going to be the website that the forms are going to be in, and we will make the forms available through that. And we will have instructions and actually a toolkit for advocates that will hopefully facilitate the use of the forms. And so to do this, what we did was we started by looking, because LHI, we do a lot of reports. So we started by saying, okay, what are the elderly type forms using the LSC NIMSI codes? What are the forms that are being used right now in LHI? Like, where are we seeing areas that are not met? Because we were looking at where are the gaps. And then with that, we created a survey. We talked to experts on the field. We work with Elder Justice, with Molly White and others in her program. And then we created a survey, a questionnaire that we sent broadly to a big long list of people that are working in this area of law. And we solicited input on what would be priorities, based on what we had found in the gap analysis that we did. And 81 groups responded. They were nonprofits, government agencies, people working directly with seniors, state type agencies, and they gave us, insight into who they were. And I gotta say that a lot of them were super expert in working with seniors. Some people were reporting doing a lot of cases. So we had a really amazing group of respondents to give us insight from the questionnaire. And so we basically decided, like, how are we gonna pick, because we got a lot of recommendations on forms. And so our criteria was to really try to make sure that the forms that we pick really answer the call of this project, which is to prevent neglect, abuse, and financial exploitation of seniors. So with that theme in mind, we said, okay, of all of the suggestions, which of these really go to that? Because we were not doing homelessness, we were not doing substance abuse or like Medicaid denials, for example. We were really looking at exploitation and abuse. And then what would be forms that work across all states? And so we were looking at national forms, anything that needed modification by county or modification by state law, we rejected because we didn't have enough resources to produce 2,300 county specific forms or to get into responding to requests for modifications. We wanted to make sure that what we put out could be used across the US and then we wanted to make sure that it would be easy to sustain. So we were not looking for super complicated forms, nothing with calculations, nothing with long list of parties or children's. We really wanted something that would be really simple, hopefully something that somebody or a non-lawyer or in a library or with a family or friend can sit down and complete in one sitting. So that's kind of how we started looking at all of the suggestions that we got in the questionnaire. And so a little bit more on the information, what were the things that were recommended to us. And like you can see here, a lot of them were, super needy, and would hope that eventually we can put some energy and investment into some of these areas of law. But a lot of them also required a lot of customization. So like revocation of power of attorney, for example, high area of need, but one that we didn't think we could meet through this project because it's very local or at least statewide. Some other areas came out like, requesting a credit report, disputing credit type issues, And so looking at all of these areas of law, then we ask people if they would feel comfortable using the forms, referring people to the forms. And I was really happy to see that most people would, though we still had a lot of maybes. And we did focus groups late last year and early this year to get at this maybe, so that when we created the toolkit, we could really figure out what's the maybe about. So I'll talk a little bit more about when we talk about the toolkit, but these were some of the answers that we got on the questionnaire about would you refer people, would you think that they can use the forms, and would they feel comfortable saying, hey, here's a form that can help you with this issue. Again, a lot of yes, but still we had concerns about what is this maybe all about. So that's why we did the focus groups with our evaluator. And then the next one was the other way around. People really, respondents didn't really feel that their clients may be comfortable creating their own documents. So when we did the focus groups, we digged into that, like what would help make a person that's vulnerable and facing exploitation or neglect, what would help make them comfortable. And that's how we've designed these materials with that in mind. And because the feedback we got that a lot of people that are experts in the field felt that they wouldn't be. So we've taken all of this into account. So at the end, after going through all this and really thinking it through, consulting with other people, consulting with people that gave us answers that said would be willing to give us more feedback if we needed it, we picked 3 types of forms. And so the first one is a cover sheet for interstate enforcement of protection order, so that if a senior has to move and they already have a protection order, they can attach this cover sheet that explains to a police officer, a court, any law enforcement agency that the order in the other state has full faith and credit, and highlights some of the things that can be super important, like if there are weapons, if there are restriction on weapons and things like that. And on this one, we did model it after a project that some of you may have heard called Project Passport. That was a project that the National Center for State Court used to create it. And so we did consult with them, and they encouraged us to pursue that and put that online. So that's what we did. The other thing that we looked when we were doing our gap analysis is that we couldn't find anywhere an online safety planning tool for elderly at risk of abuse or actually being abused. So we decided that we were going to tackle that, and very excited because I think that that's going to be helpful to anyone that's in a self-help center doing domestic violence work, not just in the senior area. I'm hoping this forum will really help a lot of people create their own safety plan. And it's pretty complete. So I'm hoping that it's going to be a tool that gets used a lot. And then based on the questions, the suggestions that we got in the questionnaire, there was a lot in there about credit ID theft, and all of that. So we decided to focus on a debt forgiveness letter, to dispute a charge with a bank or a credit card company, and then to dispute a credit record. And so those 3 forms we created.
Great. Claudia, I just wanted to pause for a moment and just respond to a question, or give you a good question from Josh, who asked, when developing these documents, are state statutes and regulations accounted for in their development, such as if a form needs to be notarized or have a certain number of witnesses to be legally valid? And I'll just provide a brief response and let you expand on that. But for Josh and others, I think one of the things, one of the aspects of Law Help Interactive is that many of the forms that are available through Law Help Interactive are in fact developed by local legal aid programs, courts, their other community partners, and are state specific. So much of our work and most of our work, in fact, is to support programs in developing more state specific forms. In this case, we were focusing on developing a set that could be used in most states or nationally. And I know, Claudia, you may want to expand on that as well.
Yeah, and I don't know what these forms refers to. I don't know if it's the forms for the project, because our criteria for the forms for the project was to avoid having to accommodate custom state law, etc. And that's why we picked these forms that can be used nationally.
Yep.
Now, of the 5,000 live forms that are on LHI, like if a state already has a domestic violence petition that's used for the whole state of California or for 13 counties in Southern California, or in Illinois, for example, or Michigan, that the experts at legal aid in Michigan, in Illinois, in California are creating the forms to meet their local and statewide requirements. So the forms in this project are not state specific, they're national. LHI has the capacity to build and create all of those local requirements inside the form, put attestations, um, all kinds of things, put releases, agree to share with police departments, whatever the local law may require. So when the forms are created in LHI, there's always a legal aid expert consulted to make sure that the forms meet the local requirements. The forms in this project are national in scope, and we specifically made that a criteria. That, a safety planning, it's not a legal document per se, it's a document to help yourself. It's in the DV area of practice. So the that one will be super complete, but there's no filing requirements on that.
Great.
Yeah. But great
Great,
question.
thank you.
Okay. So how did we develop the forms? Well, we've been really lucky that we had access to CLAJ, to Molly and Elder Justice and her colleagues, but also we had access to the folks that had participated in the questionnaire. And so what we did is that we created the forms, the initial forms on paper with their support. They basically created them, and then we thought about the questions and all of that. And once we had the package ready, including the instructions and the instructions that we thought being responsive to the concerns of the maybe groups, and put all of that in instructions for the website and on the printout, and got that to one of the best translation groups in the country, Transcend. And so everything was translated from legalese to plain language. And then from that, then we worked with Capstone Practice Systems, who are an expert template developer in the United States. And so with their acumen, we designed the online forms. Once the forms were created in beta, in test versions, we took the forms and we provided them back to people who had indicated interest in reviewing forms once they were created, back from the 81 groups that responded. And then also to other partners that are also in the LHI community that I know work in that area. So we solicited feedback on the forms, and then that feedback came back, and we iterated on the forms, probably more than once. So once we had the forms and the printouts and everything completed, then we are releasing them. So right now, the cover sheet is going to be released once we release Aging Safely, and then the consumer forms are ready to go. The safety planning, we're still on the feedback testing part, but that one will get released. And on the focus groups list in the prior slide, in addition, like I said, we wanted to really get to the maybes and to the barriers, like to be responsive to why people would not recommend people to use the forms, or to get to the part where people are saying that they would feel worried that their clients wouldn't use the forms because they may have other concerns. So we did focus groups in New York, with a broad representation, not just of legal aid groups, but also advocacy groups, community groups, and clients. We didn't run the focus groups. We had our evaluator do that, and that yielded a lot of really good feedback. So all of that we factored into the output here, the toolkit. And this was done with TRX. Okay, so where can you find the forms? So the forms will be available in agingsafely.us. And so for advocates, you will be able to access a toolkit that will tell you, this is how you can use these forms and promote them. And these are like, if you're gonna set up a clinic, you're gonna have 5 laptops going. Make sure that you have really good instructions, that you have somebody that can help troubleshoot or help people get to a next step in case somebody has a problem, but also making sure that you have really reliable Wi-Fi, and teaching people how to create and save if they want to save, those kind of things, how to set up the computer terminals, that kind of how to use the forms in particular types of settings, and how to talk about, answer questions about privacy, security, and all of that. For the older adults and the vulnerable communities and those working with them who are not advocates per se, the forms will be available there with instructions on what the form does, what the form requires, then the form itself, and then the printout. So they're gonna have consumer packages and the safety planning form and the DV cover sheet, and people will be able to come directly to that part of the website and do their own forms without more. So these are kind of the examples. This is on the left we have Aging Safely, and these are the resources directed for older adults, and you can see safety on the internet. We have a section just on safety on the internet because that was one of the things that people said needs to be covered whenever working with seniors. So we created that. And then we have the 3 types of forms. And then this one on the right is the example of the instructions for the protection, the cover sheet. Who can use the program, who should make a cover sheet, and then what to expect in terms of using the program, so that when they sit down, they can create the form. Once they start using the interview, there's guided text. And then at the end, they can download the form. They can save it if they want to. They're not required. We're very supportive of anonymous use if people don't want to do that. And then if people want to email themselves a copy of the form, or if they want to email it to their support person or caseworker, they can do that too. So that's kind of what the roadmap for the user will be. And all of the forms will be consistent. So if they come back later on because they want to do a consumer, or dispute a consumer debt or something like that, if they use one form, hopefully they'll feel comfortable because everything is being done in a systemic way. So this is the printout on that. So when they print out, they just don't print out. These are the instructions, but then this is the protection cover sheet on the right. And this is what the printout will look. And they have the instructions that go with them. It would really work on trying to find national resources so that they can, if they need more, they can connect with the best of the national resources we were out there. And we continue to request feedback. So if as we roll this out, you think, oh, well, there's another great national resource, you can always send it to us.
Great. And Claudia, as we get to this next slide, I wanted to also incorporate a great question from Deborah, who asked, can these types of forms be used by community service organizations so that work with seniors without family or friends or neighbors, so the organization can be an emergency contact? So observing that so many seniors are aging alone. So, and I responded just briefly to Deborah in the chat box saying, absolutely, that's part of one of the goals and hopes for this project, is that these kinds of forms can be used not only by legal organizations, but also be used by community-based organizations or organizations that don't necessarily, that can provide them to seniors in other contexts, or use them to collaborate in clinics or other service models with nonprofit legal services partners. So the short answer to that is yes.
Yes. Emphatically, yes. Actually, that's the vision here. We wanted to take the development on ourselves so that then all of you who are doing the really important work with working with these potential vulnerable or maybe already vulnerable people, you can, you can have this as a resource and focus on the generally, I think in service provision is the one-on-one, the support, the interaction. The forms are to enhance your work. So if you find them useful and you want to use them or you want to give them to other agencies that you know are doing that, absolutely. That's the vision here, that we will make these forms easy to use, easy to find, and that people will be able to sit down and create a form that is legit, complete, and hopefully will enable them to document what they need and present that form. And in the safety planning, we're encouraging people to come and review their safety plan every 3 to 6 months because circumstances change, so that they can have a safety plan in case they ever need it. So absolutely. We are not going to, we're going to ask everyone that wants to link to the forms to link directly to the Aging Safely um, public pages, because that's where we have all of the instructions. We don't want people to link directly just to the form links, because then you are gonna miss out on who can use the forms, what do I need for each form, and we'd rather have people know what they're gonna sit down to do and be ready for it, so that they hopefully can create it in one sitting rather than just going directly to the link that starts asking all the questions with no context. But other than that, definitely link to the Aging Safely page once we release it and share it. Okay. So, I really love once forms are created, they can be very empowering for a full community. And the concept that this is a cornerstone, I really want all of you to think about, okay, if this is a form that I want to use and I think it will be helpful, how can we take that form and create new delivery models? So, you can put them on your webpage with the link to Aging Safely. People can do it one-on-one, and people can do it for a family member, traditional uses of that. But as you do partnerships with other groups, always bring up the forms, because you never know. Maybe, maybe you're, for all we know, the sheriff may want to link to Aging Safely, and because the sheriff is dealing with the complaints about abuse and financial abuse. And if they think, wow, if we had documented the ID theft at the beginning, this case would have better outcomes. So I hope that the forums help you think of new partnerships or new relationships, and that it can strengthen those, and that you can then um, build on that. Sometimes judges like to do things that are good for the constituency, and they can bring people together, pro bono lawyers, they can bring court personnel, etc. Maybe some judges would want to do a clinic around ID theft, or something that they see a lot in their community, and they know you, and you can work with them on creating a free clinic as a pilot, to see if you get a lot of people to come and document ID theft, or request report credit inaccuracies in the record. So we're hoping that the forums will empower you to empower other community groups and strengthen your own relationships. The other thing is that the forms could be part of a pro bono project. If you already have a pro bono project, or you're thinking about one in the area of elder law, or in the area of neglect or abuse, maybe there could be a pro bono angle to that. And the forms are totally usable by pro bono lawyers for free. So I'm hoping that the forms will lead to clinics, remote services, partnerships with new groups that are also working with the same issues and are seeing the growth, the pandemic in abuse, particularly financial abuse. So we're hoping that, and as you start thinking about doing those things, definitely keep us in the loop, because if you do develop a best practice, I would love to share that with the national community that's looking at how to use remote technology to improve access to services. So, if you come up with a great partnership, let us know, because we can then share that with somebody else. Maybe you create a nice workflow. Maybe you find a new way that this really worked out really great with a pro bono partner that you didn't have before the forms. And so we definitely like to promote you and promote your success. So in terms of how we're going to know whether this is working or not, we do have some goals. We thought about the goals before. We always think about how do we want to measure success before we even start a project, so that we can keep our eye on the goal. So what we want to find out is, our victim services, whether they be legal groups or not, are they using the form? So we're going to look at metrics. We're going to look at end user feedback that we may get. We're going to look at our regular statistics, rate of assembly, that kind of thing. And hopefully we will have relationships with some of you as you start using the forms, etc. So that's one aspect of that. And then we also want to know and hear if the forms are going to be empowering the end user. And we're going to have a survey at the end of the form that people can give us, that we have, like, it's very short, it's like 5 or 7 questions. And so through the survey on the form, which is not the form itself, it's a different survey monkey, we're going to be trying to get at outcomes. And then I'm hoping that all of you won't be shy and that you will give us access information. Are you finding this accessible? Is the toolkit helpful? That you will reach back and let us know, hey, can you guys react to this feedback, or we had this situation. So we do hope to keep maintaining and improving as we move into evaluation. And then we also want to know, we do want to make sure that this increases your capacity and your familiarity with technology, and increases your understanding on how technology tools can be used for good. And since you don't have to worry about creating the forms, hopefully that capacity, that that the tools will bloom into other workflows and other partnerships. So hopefully we'll do that. And so these are kind of our goals. So we'll stop and see. I don't know if we have any other questions on the chat, or if people want to raise hands. And thank you
Sure.
for staying.
Sure. Yep. We just have a few minutes left, and we have a couple of other questions. If we can't get to all of them today, we will follow up with people individually. So one of the questions comes from Terry, who asked if the forms are multilingual, and the forms, Terry, that we have developed under this project are just in English right now, but Law Help Interactive supports the creation of forms in 5, or is it up to 6 languages now, Claudia?
Yeah, we just added French and Polish, so it's 7 if we count English.
7. Great.
I think. Yeah.
Great, terrific. And a couple people have asked for clarification on how to access the forms. So the forms will be accessible, the primary place will be through Aging Safely US, which is not quite live yet. We are gathering feedback and questions from this webinar and refining the toolkit and content on that site to polish it up based on our beta testing. But attendees and registrants for this webinar will get an announcement in the next few weeks when the site is live and the forms and toolkits are available. One other question that came in from Josh is, do we sometimes hear concerns about overwhelming court systems with legal documents to review, to be reviewed? Does this concern come up, that the the availability of these online forms or the ability for people to complete them more easily raises any sort of concerns among court systems. I'm paraphrasing your question, Josh, but I'll let Claudia talk about ways in which I think we've had a really strong and positive response from many of our court partners, many of whom are using Law Help Interactive themselves locally to automate forms and provide more support and create greater efficiencies for court clerks and other staff that are helping people.
Yeah, I mean, these forms that we're creating for this project are not, they're not fileable in any way. But for example, we just produced 42,000 domestic violence documents, including orders, pleadings, and firearm orders. What we hear from court partners, and because courts can also learn how to use these forms, is that if people can create the form at home and not come and stand in line for 30 minutes with their child after school, and then they don't have to talk to the clerk about what to sign or not sign or what part of a package to fill out, courts and clerks are very happy, because then the lines get shorter. People come with the document completely ready. Everything that needs to be filled out is filled out, because the logic of the interview doesn't let you move if you don't want them to move to the next section, and they only create the documents that they need. And then the judges are happy, because they're getting typewritten professional forms that answer all the reasons, because people can in the forms type out why they may be asking for this support or this relief versus the other. So the judges have more complete information, and they don't have to be resetting it so that the person can come and explain or refile or go get information, because the form can put all that. The judge has information where they can issue a more complete order, making sure that the form will actually work for both parties if it's something that's in a hearing. And then when the form is more complete, when the order is more complete and it's really fitting the life of the litigants, then there's more likely that there's going to be abidance by that court order. So we have done some testing about the theory whether complete bilingual forms, domestic violence bilingual forms in Texas, did they reduce post-order motions because the restrained party understood the instructions in plain language and in Spanish? And the answer was yes. So the forms tend to be a benefit for courts. They save a lot of time on the front desk. They save a lot of time at the hearing part, and they also save a lot of time in having people that, because they went through this process and they kind of got empowered with the guided interview and the instructions, everything is done in plain English, and then if it's translated in plain target language by professional translators, it saves at the end in terms of post-judgment motions. So courts do like the forms.
Great. Well, we are just about at the hour, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up. I think there are a few questions we didn't get a chance to respond to here, but we will follow up with people individually on. So Claudia, I'll let you touch on a few other ways people can connect with us, and then I can remind people about the survey and feedback.
Yeah, and if people want to connect with the groups that in your state may already be creating forms, email me and let me know what state you're in, and say, hey, I was in the training of the 24th and I want to know if we have forms in X county in this state, and I can see what we have and who the project leads are and do an intro. If you want to connect with them, and find out what they have and what other forms they may be releasing, or where they're posting their forms, so that then you can connect to their forms. I'm happy to help bridge that. But for me, the best way is to email me. And
Great.
I'm going to put my email there.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us today, and we hope that you will follow up with us if you're interested in learning more. Again, everybody who registered for this webinar will receive an announcement when the forms and the toolkit and additional information that we're releasing about the risk detector will go live. And we would really welcome your feedback, both about today's webinar as well as the concepts and tools that we're presenting. Your feedback will help us refine these products and make sure we're responsive to questions and ideas and conversations you may be having or wanting to have in your local communities. So please take a moment now to complete our feedback questionnaire, and it will also come through by email within the next 24 hours. Wonderful. Well, thank you all again for joining us, and thank you, Claudia and Tim.
Thank you.
Take
Thank
care.
you for staying. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.